Okay, now the show has gone live. I, on behalf of All India Save Education Committee, welcome all the guests of this evening, the speakers, and also the viewers and listeners of this all important webinar, national webinar on distorting Indian history in the name of rewriting. We have amongst us the President of All India Save Education Committee, Sri Prakash and Saji. We have as one of the speakers the guest would address, give the keynote address. As all of you know, Professor Irfan Habib sir, who retired from Aligarh Muslim University as the Professor of History and who is a historian of international reputation and renown. And next, we have an equally known person, the eminent educationist who retired from Bombay IIT, Professor Ram Punyaniji. We have amongst us the retired head of history, Department of History, Vivekananda College, Chennai, and also a historian, Professor A. Karunanandan sir. And we also have amongst us Professor Anita Rampal from Delhi University. Friends, this webinar has been organized at a time when the Indian polity, the nation itself, is passing through at the toughest of times, having almost unilaterally and most undemocratically imposed the National Education Policy 2020. Now the ruling dispensation, to be more particular, the RSS BJP combined are out to distort history in the name of rewriting. I don't want to speak much on the topic because you have renowned persons who would speak in their different areas. Now, I would like to request the President, All India President of All India Save Education Committee, Sri Prakash N. Saji, to deliver his inaugural speech at the beginning, at the outset of this webinar. Prakash Bhaiji.
Friends, it's indeed a great pleasure that we are discussing so-called rewriting of Indian history. We are very happy and fortunate to have Irfan Habib sir, Punyani ji, Anita ji, and all of our learned participants. The first thing that I would like to reiterate a bit more assertively that we are dealing not necessarily with an academic thing, we are dealing with a sort of ideological calamity. It's not an academic exercise. If I can take a little liberty and play with words, but I do mean it. It is more of an epidemic sort and less of an academic sort. Why? I think my contention is simple, that for them, for the present dispensation, history is a potent weapon, ideological weapon, and they have their own history. Facts can be manufactured accordingly, or interpretation may be done with some bias, but they have their own agenda and their own viewpoint. My first observation is that when we think of India, as friend would say that India that is Bharat, or maybe Bharat that is India, whatever you say, but when we think of Bharat, we think of its entire people. We don't define India in terms of a particular religion or a particular community or likewise. Entire people of India. While the present dispensation, even when they swear by constitution and speak in the name of equality for all, like the Orwellian doublespeak, there are some firsts among equals, and that defines their idea of nation, nationhood, and nationalism, which but be uh, cannot but be fanatic, cannot but be very narrow, and cannot but be totally semi-pervert view. I'm not happy when I use this word like pervert, but then when you when you define your nation in the context of particular religion or particular community, then of course it's a view which cannot be condoned. So pervert may be a very sort of angry word, but forgive me for that. But as in Sanskrit tradition, one would say, कम से कम ये इनका एक खंड दर्शन है. तो एक स्कूल है जो आज दिल्ली में आसनस्थ है, पदारूढ़ है, जो नेशन को बड़े संकीर्ण स्वरूप में परिभाषित करके चलाना चाहती है. उसके और उसी नक्शे कदम पर वो इतिहास का पुनर्लेखन कर रही है. अब मैं तो कोई इतिहास का अध्यापक नहीं हूँ, जैसे और स्कॉलर तो बिल्कुल हुई नहीं, बट शेयर कॉमन सेंस. आप देखिए, एक जमाने में जेम्स मिल ने हिस्ट्री ऑफ इंडिया की जो बात चलाई, अपने जॉर्ज मिल के पिताजी जेम्स मिल, तो हिंदू पीरियड, मुस्लिम पीरियड. अच्छा, तो आपने इंडिया को हिंदू और मुस्लिम पीरियड में बांट दिया, देन व्हेन यू स्पीक ऑफ द ब्रिटिश रूल, आप उसको क्रिश्चियन रूल क्यों नहीं कहते हैं? मतलब ये आपका एक दर्शन है. कोई क्रिश्चियन रूल की बात नहीं है, कोई हिंदू रूल की बात नहीं है, कोई मुस्लिम रूल की बात नहीं है. इतिहास में सब आते हैं, जाते हैं, राजा बदलते हैं, सिस्टम बदलती है, बट वी एज अ पीपल ऑफ इंडिया, ये हमारी एक नई सोच, एक बुनियादी सोच और समझ है, जिस सोच के आधार पर गांधी, नेहरू, पटेल ने उसके नेतृत्व में हमने फ्रीडम स्ट्रगल की, जिस सोच पर भगत सिंह ने बलिदान दिया, जिस सोच पर हमारे काफी और पुरोधा थे, वो सब ये तो इंडिया, मुस्लिम इंडिया, क्रिश्चियन इंडिया, ये उनकी सोच नहीं थी. उनकी इतिहास की समझ, हालांकि हिस्ट्री में संशोधन होते हैं, तवारीख में नई नई बातें आती है, ठीक है, बट बेसिकली हिस्ट्री की उनकी समझ ये कोई खंड दर्शन से परिचालित नहीं थी. हिस्ट्री की उनकी समझ ये कोई सीमित समझ नहीं थी. हिस्ट्री की उनकी समझ ये कोई कम्युनल समझ नहीं थी. इट वाज ए वाइडर अप्रोच, एक वाइडर अप्रोच. अब देखिए, ये अपने आर्नोल्ड टॉयनबी, उसने ये स्टडी ऑफ हिस्ट्री लिखा, तो स्टडी ऑफ हिस्ट्री के आरंभ में वो एक बात साफ कर देते हैं कि मैं किसी एक देश का आइसोलेशन स्टडी नहीं कर सकता, लेकिन उसके इर्द गिर्द जो देश है उस सबका एक गुच्छ बना के, क्योंकि कोई एक आइसोलेटेड व्यू लेना न तो एडवाइजेबल है, न तो करेक्ट है. देयर इज ए प्रोसेस ऑफ गिव एंड टेक, आना जाना, मिलना जुलना, और एक तहजीब, जैसे हम गंगा जमनी तहजीब कहते हैं, ऐसे एक सोसाइटल उसमें एक पूरे सिविलाइजेशन का विकसना, ये उसको आप किसी एक कम्युनिटी और किसी एक रिलीजन के नाम पर आइसोलेट करके देखते हैं, तो इतिहास को देखने का, सोचने का, समझने का आपका नजरिया दूषित होता है। और पर्टिकुलरली जब एक आइडियोलॉजिकल वेपन के नाते हमारे सर पर थोपा जा रहा है और इस हिसाब से इतिहास को का पुनर्लेखन हो रहा है, तो हमें समझना होगा कि ये देश को बनाने में एक नई सभ्यता, नए जमाने के चैलेंज को झेलने के लिए ये कितना एक खतरा है, कितनी एक कमजोरी है, ये हमें समझना है। तो आज ये सिविजन सोसाइटी के ओर से मैं अपने इरफान सर और बाकी सब गणमान्य इतिहास के अभ्यासी लोग आपका तहे दिल स्वागत करता हूं। और हालांकि प्रदीप भाई, हालांकि मेरा नाम प्रकाश है, मैं ये निवेदित करना चाहूंगा कि मैं प्रकाश के खोज में हूँ। So let there be light from Habib sir and other scholars. With these few words, I welcome you all and uh, and request Pradeep Bhai to continue the proceedings. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, Sir, President of All India Civilization Committee, Prakash Bhaiji, for your speech that in fact outlines the dangers that are fraught with this motive of rewriting history, in fact, distorting history in the name of rewriting it. Now, one point I missed to mention actually at the outset, that since it's an online program, would like to finish it within 2 hours. There may be 5-10 minutes plus or minus. Now, I'll be requesting Professor Irfan Habib, the historian of not only national but international repute and renown, to deliver his keynote address. Professor Habib, sir.
Thank you. Professor Shah, Professor Roy, Professor Karunanandan, Professor Punyani, Professor Anita Rampal, friends and fellow listeners, it's really an honor for me to have been asked, to have been invited to deliver the keynote address at this webinar. I think it's a very important occasion, and I congratulate this organization for holding this webinar on this very important matter. I should begin by saying that the history of a country is like national memory, and that reminds us that each individual finds his memory to be very necessary. He has to remember people whom he has to meet, he has to remember past experiences and so forth. If you have an individual, he has a total false memory of himself, who, to boast of achievements he never committed. He makes enemies, he marks out enemies. What would you think of him as an individual? Similarly, for a nation, accuracy of history is like accuracy of individual memory. One must not overclaim, must not nurse excessive distrust of others. Just as an individual should remember facts correctly, a nation should also remember its history correctly. And then It must be a comprehensive history, embracing the past of all its constituent elements. Now, therefore, both accuracy and comprehensiveness are regarded as the basic principles of historiography. And our history has been built up, what would be called national memory has been built up by writings of many historians and scholars, beginning with Raja Tarangini in particular in the middle of the 12th century. And then you had Persian historiography, chronicles, and biographies. And then with the coming of the British and the influence of modern sciences and modern historiography, you have a wider and wider conception of the field of history. Even the meanest individual must have a place in it. It cannot simply be the history of rulers and priests, it must be the history of all people. And therefore, many new aspects have been throughout added to point out a few: history of technology, history of women's history, history, peasant history, and many aspects of intellectual, social, and economic history, which were not regarded as part of a nation's past. Because more and more we want to have history of all people and not some people. And we want to have an accurate history, not only comprehensive but accurate. And one is very grateful for the generations of scholars, both non Indian and Indian, who have reconstructed our history to embrace more and more elements of our past. Prince around just before 1840, by breaking the Brahmi script, gave us Ashoka and opened the gates to ancient Indian history. So, Europeans were there. Who can forget the contributions of people like H.M. Eliot for Indian medieval Indian history, and uh, many British scholars who opened ancient Indian history for us. These inscriptions were unread until they read them. So we are all grateful for that tradition, and then more or less the Indians took over. And among these historians, there were many differences of opinion, differences of comprehension, favoring one side or one religion over another. But they all believed in the accuracy of facts. They established the facts first and selected them for their own view later. And therefore, whether it is R.C. Majumdar for ancient Indian history or Jadunath Sarkar for medieval Indian history, the fact is one may differ from their opinions, but they always went for facts. They subjected themselves to historiographic method. Of course, their Muslim counterparts sometimes, like Rashi, for instance, but um, they were all they were all dependent on historical evidence. You might differ from them in regard to the weights they placed on a particular source, but they were confining themselves to the not particularly one view or another, but views which could be sustained as alternative views by reasonable people. So they built up our historical tradition with all its controversies. The difficulty today and the new thing today is that that tradition is being contested. That tradition where we learned to confine ourselves to facts. For our view, we might have different selection of facts, but we will confine ourselves to facts. Now, unfortunately, now that we will be going into in the webinar, what is happening is that we construct a myth and then we build up a so-called history on its basis, or that we ignore a large number of facts at all in order to have a selection which is a mix of myths and facts in order to reconstruct a totally fictitious past which we now proclaim to be history. That is that had been taking place partly in Pakistan, where history was supposed to begin only with Muhammad bin Qasim's invasion of Sindh, and now, but for sheer scale of fiction, what we are now seeing in India totally puts the Pakistan effort into the shadows. Now, I know there are speakers. Professor Karunanandan would be speaking on ancient India, and Professor Punyani will be speaking on medieval history, and Professor Rampal would be touching on the way one should write textbooks. I would not like to step into their terrains, but as examples of what is happening
Okay.
and how historiography proper is sought to be destroyed, I shall still take some examples. Number one, throughout the world, racialism has been rejected. Anyone who speaks of being an Aryan and of his own country as the home of the Aryans would remind everyone of the Nazis. They took our symbol of swastika and claimed that Germany was the homeland of the Aryans and they peopled the world. Mr. Golwalkar of the RSS praised Hitler, and the RSS obtained the entire Aryan theory from the seems to have obtained the Aryan theory refurbished from the Nazis. I was looking at the UGC syllabus that is now to be the model for BA courses in history. And I was astonished that in 2022 there would be any country which would say like the Nazis that we are Aryans and we went out and peopled the world, civilized the world as Aryans. Um, but it is there. India is the home of the Aryans. You proclaim in the syllabus, you don't say that you discuss it, it's proclaimed. And I am reminded of the controversy that took place between K.M. Munshi and his editor of the series of the history of India that Munshi patronized over this matter. And Majumdar was clear that if there were Aryans, they were immigrants. And he published a chapter fully defining this theory And under protest, which he recorded, another article, another chapter, contrary chapter, in which it was said that Aryans went out of India. So even the historian among the great historians of India, who is closest to what might be called the Brahmanical interpretation of ancient Indian history, was not prepared to concede the Aryan theory. But here it is believed, like the Nazis, that India was the home of the Aryans, as if there is some particular importance given to being Aryan. And of course, behind it is the necessary contempt for non Aryans, including Dravidians and the Chinese and so on. Dravidians are kith and kin, and it's a it's a very unfortunately insulting doctrine for us to proclaim that we as Aryans are something, Indians, uh, non-Dravidian Indians, that is, are someone who are superior to every other race. I see this again in these renaming of Indus civilization as Saraswati Sindhu civilization, and in the insistence that Indian civilization is Indus civilization is Aryan. No proof is necessary. Proclamation is sufficient. Um, you you might have historians know you. Many of you must have been knowing that the closest study of the Indus ideographs has suggested no link at all with Sanskrit or Vedic Sanskrit. On the other hand, two very important Dravidian links have been found. One in the uh, numerous fish symbols, and second in the position of the arrow sign. Both therefore suggest that there could be, I'm not going further than that, there could be links with Proto-Dravidian. But of any Aryan link, there's no trace. Even if the bones of a wild ass, one insists that they are those of a horse, it doesn't change the situation. The horse is not portrayed on Indus seals. And the Aryan migration in India was after the post, after the use of the horse had come, but the use of the bit had not come. So the horse came, domesticated horse came with the Aryans, Aryan immigration, but the bit did not come until the Greeks brought it in Mauryan times and later. Now, but that's another issue. But certainly, this harping of Aryanization of the Indus civilization, trying to date the Rig Veda to 5000 BC, riding over the fact that that Rig Veda has domesticated horses, and there is no proof of archaeological proof of domesticated horses before 3000 BC anywhere in the world, and certainly nowhere in India. But this was the situation. This was the claim made in the ancient India textbook that was introduced by NCRT under the government, under the Bajpayee government, the first uh, first incarnation of the BJP's government. Now, these are the similarly other claims are made. For instance, that Ramayana and Mahabharata have historical basis behind them, and they should be integrated with history. I'm again following what the UGC syllabus for history asks us to do. The caste system is ruled out of ancient Indian history as if there was no caste system. Um, Even as far as Sanskrit literature is concerned, there's more importance on the epics than on, say, Kalidas, for instance. Um, and the introduction of writing is not considered a sufficient topic of interest to be included in ancient Indian history. On the other hand, though the caste system was not discussed, the origin of the Rajputs becomes very important. Um, One would be surprised that this should be included in any history syllabus, a particular origins of a particular subcaste, while other subcastes are forgotten. Nobody speaks of the origin of the um, untouchables, the so-called untouchables, but it is there in the UGC syllabus, which is now to be made universal in central universities. Um, so, as far as ancient India is concerned, there is again omission, um, di- uh, creation of mythology by omission. Buddhism is not given its due place. Um, and the basic argument in the RSS writings was that Chandragupta was, and along with Kautilya or Chanakya, were great nationalists who drew out the Greeks, but Ashoka was responsible for the decline of the empire because of his addiction to Buddhism and Dhamma and non-violence. So I expect in the new textbooks all that would come. Now, clearly, this particular presentation of ancient India, this one-sided presentation and totally uh, partisan one, in which almost all classes, apart from the ruling class, is ruled out. And as far as culture is concerned, it's basically confined to religion. This totally misrepresents the history of ancient India. While so much research has been done on movement of ideas, so much history on subhistory extracted from inscriptions, there's Shudras were brought into history by Ramcharan Sharma. All that is disregarded in the UGC syllabus, and I expect this would be the case in the um, in the school syllabi that are being prepared. I'm sure Professor Karuna Nandan would be taking up these subjects uh, in greater detail. Therefore, I would leave ancient India with these remarks. When you come to medieval India, there's of course this nonsense about 1000 years of foreign rule. You see, foreign rule means rule by foreigners. Um, it does not mean Muslims. Just as rule by Kshatriyas doesn't mean rule by foreigners. Muslim rulers in India were as much Indian, born in India, even if their Parents were born elsewhere, but most of the Indian rulers, most of the dynasties, Sultanate dynasties, um, their rulers were Indian born and Indian Muslims. They governed from places in India, notably Delhi and other capitals. And they didn't send out any wealth outside. Whatever they collected in taxes, they spent here. In this respect, they were the same as Kshatriyas in ancient India.
ஆயிரத்தி கொஞ்சம் தெரியாது.
And therefore, um, to call them foreigners is totally mistake. And if this is followed, then there is no country in the world in which there were not such rulers who were who would be called foreigners. For instance, China had the Yuan dynasty and then the Manchu dynasty, but they don't call them foreign rulers. Similarly, England, for a long time after the Norman conquest, had not only French rulers, but the governing the language of government was French. They don't regard it as a foreign rule. Therefore, this particular addiction of RSS to regard medieval governments as foreign governments just because the ruling class was largely Muslim, not entirely Muslim, but largely not entirely uh, Muslim, but largely Muslim, is it totally it totally misrepresents the position, and therefore this business of 1,000 years of foreign rule is not only an historical and false, but gravely mischievous. Um, when you come to other matters in medieval history, uh, the UGC syllabus, for instance, begins the history of the caste system with the period of Muslim rule, as if Muslims brought in Manu Smriti and Arthashastra. I mean, the whole thing is absurd, but absurdity is no deterrent to what the RSS and BJP are trying to do. You know, the theory was that Sati came because Hindu women were endangered by Muslims. Archaeology, of course, demolished that theory because Sati is much older than Islam. And now the caste system is also being attributed as a defensive mechanism. In what way, one can't say. How Hinduism would be defended by having a class like untouchables. Um, this theory is now to be propounded. Under this theory, any rulers who were religiously tolerant or conciliatory are looked at great with great suspicion. I remember um, the description of Rabindranath Banerjee's
இல்லை இது
uh,
இல்லை
visit um,
இங்கே வரும் நினைக்கிறேன்.
to the Viceroy Curzon.
நேஷனல் இல்லை இது வேற போட்டு முதல்ல போட்டு தப்பா வந்தது அது.
The Curzon reported that
இதுல
Surinath Banerjee described the nationalist Ashoka and Akbar as India's great rulers
ஆமா போயிட்டு இருக்கு ஆடியோ கேட்டு
are being rejected by uh, the RSS and RSS favored syllabi. Akbar has been wiped out from the UGC syllabus. Akbar's name is not there. And Mughal administration comes without any description of who established it. There are other historical errors in it, but there is a glorification of what is called Hindu resistance. Um, the slogan of Hindu Pat Pashahi, which was raised by the second Peshwa for a very short amount of time, is now pushed back into the reign of Aurangzeb. So it's not only um, wrong interpretation, but a total invention of facts. Um, in the history of the national movement, one can always notice a glorification of Savarkar, as if Savarkar was the equal of Gandhiji in the national movement, a man who offered three apologies. They are to be compared with other nationalists who offered no apologies, who mounted the gallows, who suffered long imprisonments in Andamans or died there. And he is now supposed to be a major figure of the national movement. Savarkar created the Hindutva theory, which, like the Pakistan theory, totally misrepresented the aims of India's struggle for freedom and hastened the process of partition. Therefore, a divisive movement which had hardly any place in the national movement is now being glorified as the major factor which brought Indian independence. If you read Savarkar after 1920, his opponents are not the British but the Muslims. That is also the case with Golwalkar. Golwalkar praises history's mistreatment of Jews. It's very surprising how easily forgetting it, both Israel and India, present government of India, are such friends. But that is the kind of spirit out of which Indian history is being re-envisioned. And all our schools and all our universities are supposed to instruct students in this falsified version of history. Friends, I think the occasion is very important, the crisis very serious. It is the duty of all historians, both Indian and non-Indian, to stand up for the integrity of their profession. I particularly congratulate Professor Shah and Professor Roy for organizing this webinar on this very important matter. The message should go out from all quarters that Indian history will be defended by Indian historians. There may be many differences among us on what particular aspects, what importance should be given, degree of importance should be given to what aspect, and so on. That is only natural among social scientists. But we all depend on facts. We all depend on hard evidence. We do not depend on fiction. And therefore, I greatly welcome this particular step that you have taken by holding this webinar for the defense of the profession of historians and the subject of history. Thank you. आवाज नहीं आ रही।
Many thanks, Professor Habib sir, for your speech that has been not only enlightening, but that has given us the wisdom of fighting out the untruth that the ruling dispensation wants to place truth with. The fiction that is being replaced, I mean the facts that are being replaced by fiction, the untruths that are being that are replacing truths, and the whole one-sided way of dishing out concocted and distorted facts will be exposed by the concerted efforts of the historians, as you made clear in your speech. Thank you so much, sir. We'll be expecting more such speeches from you in future. Now, as per the agenda, the next speaker shall be Professor Ram Puniani, who is a known name to all of us for the commendable job he has been doing by presenting the facts of history and thus fighting communalization. He'll be particularly dealing with the communalization of medieval history. Professor Puniani, who has retired from IIT Mumbai, is a renowned educationist, and I request Professor Puniani to deliver his speech. Professor Puniani, sir.
Thank you, Professor Mahapatra, and I'm very glad that I have been called to this webinar. Though, of course, I must clarify, I am not a historian. I have educationally very different background, but I had to go through this history and trying to understand history. मैं हिंदी में बात करूंगा तो चलेगा?
Yes, sir.
जी, तो मैं हिंदी में ही बात करता हूँ। राजशेखर जी ने मुझे कहा था खास तौर से, तो मैं हिंदी में बात करता हूँ। तो मैं ये बताना चाहता हूँ कि पहली बात तो मैं इतिहास को ज़्यादा गहराई से समझने की कोशिश क्यों करनी पड़ी, उसके पीछे भी एक कारण यही है कि कैसे इतिहास का आधार लेकर समाज में सांप्रदायिकता बढ़ाई जा रही है। इतिहास को नफरत का एक आधार बनाया गया है, खास तौर से मध्ययुगीन इतिहास को, जहाँ कई मुसलमान राजाओं ने दूसरों के साथ मिलकर राज किया, पर वो ऐसा उसको एक मुस्लिम राज के रूप में, जैसे जेम्स मिल ने कहा, वो ट्रेडिशन के आधार पे पूरा इसको मुस्लिम राज कहा गया। तो और उसी के दौरान जो चीज़ें हुई उनको एक धर्म के चश्मे से समाज में रखा गया। और मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि आज के समय में जो नफ़रत अल्पसंख्यकों के खिलाफ, खास तौर से मुसलमानों के खिलाफ जो नफ़रत फैलाई गई है, उसका बहुत महत्वपूर्ण कारण है ये इतिहास का प्रकार का लेखन, जिसमें मध्ययुगीन इतिहास का बहुत ही ज़्यादा प्रभाव रहा है। और उसमें हबीब साहब ने, जो तो बड़े हिस्टोरियन हैं, उन्होंने इसको बहुत अच्छे से कई चीज़ों को बताया है, और मैं कुछ ऐसी चीज़ें लूँगा जो समाज में प्रचलित की गई हैं, सिलेबस में भी आई हैं, और सिलेबस के साथ साथ वो पूरे समाज में उनका प्रचार किया जाता है, जिससे सांप्रदायिक ताकतें इसको अपने एजेंडा में लेकर उसके आधार पे राजनीति करती हैं, उसके आधार पे आंदोलन चलाती हैं, और एक वातावरण खड़ा करती हैं जिससे समाज में हिंसा होने की संभावना, जिसके आधार पे हिंसा समाज में होती है। तो ये बात जब हम देखते हैं तो उसमें अभी सिलेबस में जो आ रहा है, वैसे तो पहले ये सब तो हम पहले जानते ही हैं कि 1998 में 1998 अटल बिहारी वाजपेयी की गवर्नमेंट में मुरली मनोहर जोशी थे, उस समय से ये प्रक्रिया की शुरुआत हुई। पर उस समय वो सरकार की मेजॉरिटी बीजेपी की उतनी नहीं थी, तो उन्होंने छोटा छोटा उसमें बदलाव किया, पर अभी तो एक पूरे तौर पे उसी प्रकार के इतिहास को समाज में लाने की कोशिश की जा रही है। तो 1998 1998 में भी मुरली मनोहर जोशी ने इसी प्रकार की चीज़ों को बढ़ावा दिया और कई लोगों ने उसको सैफ्रनाइजेशन ऑफ हिस्ट्री यानी इतिहास का भगवाकरण या कहेंगे इतिहास का सांप्रदायिकीकरण, ये एक उसमें उन्होंने मुद्दा रख दिया। तो यहाँ से जो हमारे जैसे इतिहास की हमारी जो याददाश्त है और ये इतिहास की बातों को लोगों तक ले जाने के भी बहुत मैकेनिज्म हैं, बहुत सारे तरीके खड़े किए गए हैं और ये तरीके सांप्रदायिक ताकतों द्वारा किए गए हैं। और दूसरा ये है कि इसमें एक खास बात यह है कि जो मध्ययुगीन के कुछ मुसलमान राजा थे, उनको आज के मुसलमानों से जोड़ा जाता है। अब ये सांप्रदायिक राजनीति की चाल है और ये एक इशारे वाली राजनीति है। तो इशारे से एक तरफ से मुसलमान राजाओं की आलोचना और उसको फिर आज के मुसलमानों पे उसका प्रतिबिंब, आज के मुसलमानों के खिलाफ एक प्रकार के नफरत का वातावरण ये खड़ा करना उसमें एक बहुत बड़ा तरीका हो गया है। तो इतिहास का ये जो सांप्रदायिकीकरण हुआ, चला और बढ़ते गया और अभी आगे वाले सिलेबस में और भी ये भयंकर रूप लेने वाला है। उसमें मुख्य तौर से पहली बात तो जो इतिहास को देखा जाता है वो केवल राजाओं के आधार पे देखा जाता है। इतिहास में केवल राजा ही नहीं होते, इतिहास में तो आम लोग ज़्यादा होते हैं, जो उत्पादन करते हैं, जो दस्तकारी करते हैं, जो घर का काम करते हैं, जो जंगलों की रख रखाव करते हैं, जंगलों के साथ जीते हैं, ये सब लोग होते हैं। तो इस प्रकार के इतिहास में केवल राजा के धर्म को महत्व दिया जाता है, जिसको अभी बहुत विस्तृत कर रहे हैं। यहाँ एक बात और कह दूं कि अभी पिछले 8-10 साल से इस प्रकार के इतिहास लेखन में और बहुत सारे तथाकथित इतिहासकार आ रहे हैं जो इस विचारधारा को ज़्यादा मजबूत करना चाहते हैं और वो उन हिंदू राजाओं में अपने प्रतीकों को ढूंढना चाहते हैं जिन्होंने मुसलमान राजाओं के साथ संघर्ष किया। और यहाँ जो हिंदू राजा हैं उनको एक राष्ट्रवादी कहा जाता है, नेशनलिस्ट कहा जाता है, और जो मुसलमान राजा है उनको विदेशी आक्रमक कहा जाता है। अब ये विदेशी आक्रमक और ये राष्ट्रवाद के प्रतीक, पहले इसको भी समझ लें कि राजाशाही में इस प्रकार की कोई सीमाएं तो होती नहीं थी और वो सीमाएं नहीं होती थी। जो राजा की ताकत रही दूसरे राजाओं के साथ मिलजुल कर वो राज भी करता था, लड़ाई भी करता था। और यहाँ से अगर जैसे देखें तो मुसलमान राजाओं के आधार पे जो किया जाता है, नफरत का माहौल खड़ा किया जाता है कि भाई ये विदेशी हैं। तो इसमें बाबर को ही हम देख लें तो बाबर भी जो काबुल के क्षेत्र से यहाँ आया, तो आने के पहले उसको यहाँ आने का निमंत्रण तो राणा सांगा ने दिया था। राणा सांगा ये राजस्थान में था, इब्राहिम लोदी दिल्ली में था, और फिर मतलब निमंत्रण तो यहाँ से आया, बाद में उसमें कुछ परिवर्तन हुए और राणा सांगा की ही बाबर से लड़ाई हुई खानवा में, वो बात और है। पर सवाल यहाँ धर्म का नहीं था, सवाल यहाँ सत्ता का था। तो जो सत्ता के सवाल हैं उनको धर्म के प्रतिबिंब में रखकर इन प्रकार की चीज़ों को फैलाया जाता है और उसके आधार पे दो खास चीज़ों को बढ़ावा दिया जाता है। एक कि भाई ये मुसलमान राजाओं ने यहाँ के हिंदू मंदिरों को तोड़कर हिंदू धर्म का अपमान किया। इस बात को सिलेबस में अलग अलग तरीके से गहराई से रखने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं। अब यहाँ जहाँ तक मंदिर का सवाल है, इरफान हबीब साहब बता रहे थे कि भारत के इतिहास की महान किताबों में राजतरंगिणी का उन्होंने उल्लेख किया। तो मैं यहाँ उल्लेख कर दूं कि राजतरंगिणी में उस समय की भी एक बात है। राजतरंगिणी जो कवि कल्हण की लिखी है, उसी में उल्लेख है कि 11वीं शताब्दी के राजा हर्षदेव ने अपने राज्य के दौरान एक नए ओहदे का निर्माण किया जिसका टाइटल था देवोत्पतन नायक। देवोत्पतन नायक यानी वो अधिकारी जो देवताओं की मूर्तियों को उखाड़े, और उसमें ये कहा गया था कि वही मूर्तियां उखाड़ के लाइए जो सोने चांदी की बनी हैं, जिनमें हीरे जवाहरात जड़े हैं। तो ये एक तरफ से जो मंदिर तोड़ने की बात है, उसको बहुत महत्व दिया गया, और मंदिर तोड़ने के आधार पे फिर बाबरी मस्जिद का मुद्दा सामने लाया गया। जैसे बाबरी मस्जिद को बाबर ने बनाया, राम मंदिर को तोड़ के बनाया, भगवान राम का जन्म वहीं हुआ। तो ये जो फिक्शन की बात है, फैक्ट क्या है और फिक्शन क्या है, उसमें आखिर तक तो हम जैसे जानते हैं ये मामला सुप्रीम कोर्ट तक गया। सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने भी कहा कि 1949 1949 में जो रामलल्ला की मूर्तियों को वहां रखा गया वो एक अपराध था। ये भी कहा कि 6 दिसंबर 1992 को बाबरी मस्जिद तोड़ी गई, वो भी एक अपराध था। और ये भी कहा कि भगवान राम का जन्म वहीं हुआ, इसका भी कोई प्रमाण नहीं है। तो ये पर अगर हम ख्याल करें तो इस प्रकार की चीज के आधार पे कितना एक सांप्रदायिक वातावरण देश में खड़ा किया गया, और निश्चित रूप से इतिहास की एक गलत समझ को सांप्रदायिक राजनीति का कितना बड़ा हथियार बनाया गया, ये हमारे सामने स्पष्ट है। अभी अभी हम काशी विश्वनाथ की बात देखें तो वहाँ ज्ञान व्यापी मस्जिद के बारे में अभी जो विवाद चल रहा है उसको भी खड़ा किया गया, और उसी के आधार पे बहुत सारे मंदिरों की बात की जाती है, और हिंदू मुसलमान राजाओं की बात की जाती है, और सिंबल ऐसे दिया जाता है जैसे मुसलमान राजा मुसलमानों के प्रतीक थे, हिंदू राजा हिंदुओं के प्रतीक थे। अब सवाल तो यह है कि राजा पूरी प्रजा का प्रतीक नहीं होता, और उसी राजा की प्रजा में हिंदू भी होते हैं, मुसलमान भी होते हैं, ये दोनों तरफ से बात होती है। और राजा का अगर हम प्रशासन भी देखें तो मध्ययुगीन काल में भी प्रशासन केवल धर्म के आधार पे नहीं चलता था। पहली बात तो ये क्लियर है कि पूरे देश में मुसलमान राजाओं का राज्य नहीं था। नंबर एक, आज केवल मुगलों को ही हाईलाइट किया जाता है, और यही आलोचना की जाती है कि मुगल राजाओं को ज़्यादा महत्व दिया गया, जबकि सच्चाई तो ये है कि एनसीईआरटी की जो किताबें 1980 में आई उनमें कितना एक बड़ा संतुलन था, सब चीज़ों को बराबरी के आधार पे स्कूल के इसमें ली गई थी। पर आज ये जो मुगल बादशाह उनके पहले तो गुलाम वंश, खिलजी वंश और दूसरे वंश भी हो गए हैं, और दक्षिण भारत में भी बहमनी किंगडम्स और दूसरे हुए। तो इन सबको एक रंग में रख के कि ये मुस्लिम राज था, मुसलमानों का राज था, इसी को लेकर एक तरफ मुस्लिम सांप्रदायिकता ने अपनी समझ बनाई कि भाई यहाँ का तो राज हमारा था और हम ही राजा थे, हिंदू तो हमारी प्रजा थी। ये एक प्रकार की बात कही जाती है, जबकि वास्तव में हम देखें तो राजाओं के प्रशासन में तो बड़े राजा महाराज जो जिसको एम्परर कहते हैं, एम्परर के साथ दूसरे बहुत सारे राजा दोनों धर्मों के होते थे। और अकबर के बारे में देखें तो अकबर के दरबार में आपको राजा टोडरमल भी मिलेंगे, बीरबल भी मिलेंगे। और औरंगज़ेब की बात अगर हम करें तो औरंगज़ेब के दरबार में तो हिंदू राजाओं का जो प्रतिशत था, जो असरदार जिनके पास ओहदे थे, वो सबसे बड़ा था, जैसे प्रोफेसर अथर अली अपनी किताब में बताते हैं। तो ये प्रशासन, जैसे यहाँ महाराष्ट्र में छत्रपति शिवाजी महाराज, अब इनके बारे में कहा जाता है तो ये कोई हिंदू राज्य नहीं था, ये भी एक राजा का राज्य था, और उसके प्रशासन में भी मुसलमान भी थे। मौलाना हैदर अली उनके बड़े सलाहकार थे, और उनके बॉडीगार्ड्स में या उनके रक्षकों में, उनके एसोसिएशंस में रुस्तम जमान भी थे, बहुत सारे मुसलमान सेनापति भी थे। तो ये चीज़ों को केवल जब धर्म के आधार पर रखकर, अभी अभी हमने देखा कि एक तरफ पद्मावत नाम की फिल्म आई थी, फिर उसके बाद अभी पृथ्वीराज चौहान नाम की फिल्म आई, तो ये फिल्मों ने फिर वो एक कर्णा, मेरे ख्याल से मणिकर्णिका, ये भी फिल्म आई। तो इसके माध्यम से जिस प्रकार का संदेश जाता है वो हिंदू मुसलमान को बांटने का संदेश जाता है, जबकि इसको हम कह सकते हैं एक कम्युनल हिस्टोरियोग्राफी, इतिहास को देखने का सांप्रदायिक तरीका, या इतिहास को धर्म के चश्मे से देखने का तरीका। पर ये आज ज़्यादा मजबूत हो रहा है, ज़्यादा लोकप्रिय हो रहा है। अगर मेरी याददाश्त सही है तो 1980 के दशक में जो एनसीईआरटी की किताबें आई थी, उन्होंने बहुत संतुलन से, एक बहुत बेहतरीन तरीके से इतिहास की जो समझ होना चाहिए राजाओं के बारे में, लोगों के बारे में, लगान व्यवस्था के बारे में, संस्कृति के बारे में, भाषा के बारे में, धर्मों के मेल-जोल के बारे में, हमारे खान-पान और बाकी चीज़ों के मेल-जोल के बारे में बहुत सुंदरता से दिखाया था। और उसमें उसके बाद ये कोई फीलिंग इम्प्रेशन नहीं आता था कि हिंदू बनाम मुसलमान की राजनीति है। हिंदू बनाम मुसलमान की राजनीति थी नहीं। और इस दृष्टिकोण को ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा अभी नए सिलेबस में डालने की कोशिश की जा रही है कि हिंदुओं पर अत्याचार हुए। और उसमें एक और कहा जाता है धर्मांतरण के बारे में कि मुसलमान राजाओं ने तलवार के जोर पर इस्लाम को फैलाया। और ये बात को भी ज़्यादा ये हाईलाइट किया जा रहा है, जबकि ये बात पूरी गलत है। जो इस्लाम फैला वो तो एक पहले मेल जोल से फैला, जब मलाबार के तट पर अरब व्यापारी आते थे। और उसके बाद वर्ण व्यवस्था के, जैसे स्वामी विवेकानंद बताते हैं, वर्ण व्यवस्था के अत्याचार से बचने के लिए कई लोगों ने इस्लाम धर्म को कबूल किया। तो इस्लाम के फैलने के बाद के आधार पे भी नफ़रत फैलाई जाती है। और इसको यही कहा जाता है जैसे यहाँ का धर्म तो केवल हिंदू धर्म है। अब हिंदू धर्म में भी कितनी परंपराएं हैं, कितने उसके सब डिविजन्स हैं, अलग-अलग ये हैं, वो भी हमें सोचने की ज़रूरत है। और उसमें जैसे एक तरफ ब्राह्मणवाद है, एक तरफ श्रमणवाद है, नाथ, तंत्र, भक्ति, शैव, सिद्धांत, ये परंपराएं हैं। तो ये चीज़ों को नज़रअंदाज करके एक रूपी हिंदू समाज बनाम एक रूपी मुस्लिम समाज, इसको ज़्यादा लाने की कोशिश की जा रही है। और ये हमारे समाज की उस परंपरा को तोड़ने की बात है जिसमें यहाँ मुख्य रूप से मेल-जोल के आधार पर हमारी सभ्यता, संस्कृति, भाषा, खाने-पीने की चीज़ें, पहनने के हमारा पहनावा और धर्म की परंपराओं का विकास हुआ। अब जहाँ एक तरफ ये गांधी का कई बार नाम लेते हैं, पर गांधी का जो मुख्य आधार था, उनकी जो इतिहास की समझ थी, ये भी हमें देखना चाहिए। मुझे भी हैरानी हुई कि जब मैंने हिंद स्वराज में देखा, महात्मा गांधी इतिहास के बारे में बहुत महत्वपूर्ण बात कहते हैं, जिसको पूरी तौर से नज़रअंदाज करके आज नए सिलेबस में हिंदू बनाम मुस्लिम किया जाता है। तो उसमें गांधी जी हिंद स्वराज में इस बात को लिखते हैं कि यहाँ मुसलमान राजाओं के प्रजा के रूप में हिंदू थे, हिंदू राजाओं की प्रजा में मुसलमान भी थे। और ये इनका जो जीने का अपना तरीका वो चलता था। और तीसरी बात जो इसी में देखना चाहिए कि भारत के इतिहास की किताबों में हम डिस्कवरी ऑफ इंडिया को भी ले सकते हैं, जो जवाहरलाल नेहरू ने लिखी। और उसमें उन्होंने यहाँ जो हमारी मेल जोल की सभ्यता है, जिसको उन्होंने गंगा जमनी तहजीब के रूप में रेखांकित किया, वो तो पूरा मेल जोल की चीज़ें हैं। वो भक्ति परंपरा हो, सूफी परंपरा हो और बाकी चीज़ों का जो मेल जोल है, इसको नज़रअंदाज किया जा रहा है। तो ये दो हमारे जो मुख्य राष्ट्रीय चरित्र हैं, राष्ट्रीय आइकॉन्स हैं, एक तरफ गांधी, दूसरी तरफ नेहरू, दोनों ने ही इतिहास पे बहुत महत्वपूर्ण कमेंट्री की है, खास तौर से मध्ययुगीन इतिहास के बारे में। खैर, नेहरू की किताब तो पूरी हर चीज़ पे जाती है, पर मध्ययुगीन इतिहास के बारे में वो बहुत महत्वपूर्ण बातें कहती हैं, जिसमें ये मेल जोल की चीज़ों को महत्वपूर्ण तरीके से रखा जाता है। अभी इसी से लेकर एक-एक करके, अभी जैसे टीपू सुल्तान को एक डेमोनाइज़ किया जाता है, पर अगर आप देखें तो मैनिफेस्टो ऑफ टीपू सुल्तान जो उनकी उसका भी अनुवाद किया है, तो मैनिफेस्टो ऑफ टीपू सुल्तान में भी ये बात बताई गई है कि टीपू सुल्तान उसमें कहता है कि हमारे यहाँ अलग-अलग धर्मों के लोग रहते हैं, पर एक राजा के रूप में मेरी ज़िम्मेदारी है कि मैं सभी धर्मों के लोगों का पूरा आदर करूं और उनकी ज़रूरतों का ख्याल करूं। अब उसमें से चुन के निकाला जाता है कि उसने ब्राह्मणों का धर्मांतरण किया, जो पूरी तौर से गलत बात है। उसने कुछ जो लोग विद्रोही थे, उनके बारे में ये बातें कही। तो ये टीपू सुल्तान के बारे में भी जो सिलेबस को ज़्यादा खराब किया जा रहा है, उसको ज़्यादा एक कट्टर मुसलमान का रूप दिया जा रहा है, जो सच्चाई से पूरी तौर से दूर है। फिर राष्ट्रीय प्रतीकों के रूप में एक तरफ छत्रपति शिवाजी महाराज, दूसरी तरफ पृथ्वीराज चौहान, तीसरी तरफ महाराणा प्रताप, इन सबको सामने लाने की कोशिश की जा रही है। मेरी मान्यता है कि हमारे जो राष्ट्रीय प्रतीक होना चाहिए वो आज़ादी के आंदोलन से होना चाहिए, जहाँ हमारे लोकतंत्र के विकास की शुरुआत होती है। और किताबों में इस प्रकार की चीज़ों को लाना, जहाँ एक तरफ रैशनल थॉट को नीचे करके श्रद्धा के आधार पे अभी बहुत सारी चीज़ें आ रही हैं, वो शायद इसके बारे में भी यहाँ बात होनी चाहिए कि कैसे न्यूटन की थ्योरी हो या पाइथागोरस की थ्योरी हो,
लो हो रही है।
इन चीज़ों को किस प्रकार से दरकिनार किया जा रहा है, और पूरा ज्ञान वेदों में है। इस प्रकार इसकी तो बहुत बड़ी, मेरे ख्याल से प्राचीन भारत के हमारे जो मित्र हैं उसके बारे में बात करेंगे। पर दो तरीके से इतिहास को पूरा भ्रष्ट किया जा रहा है। एक तरफ से इसको सांप्रदायिक नज़रिए को मजबूत किया जा रहा है आगे आने वाले सिलेबस में, और दूसरी तरफ से साइंटिफिक टेम्पर, वैचारिक सोच, तर्कपूर्ण सोच, इसको भी एक कमज़ोर करके आगे आने वाली पीढ़ियों में जो नफ़रत बढ़ाने का काम है वो ज़्यादा मजबूती से होगा। तो मैं उम्मीद करता हूँ कि इस वेबिनार के माध्यम से हम सब इतिहासकारों से, विद्यार्थियों से, आम लोगों से अपील करें कि इतिहास के फैक्ट्स को समझने का जो एक तरीका है, तरीका एक तरफ गांधी ने दिखाया, एक तरफ नेहरू ने दिखाया, एक तरफ बहुत सारे इतिहासकारों ने जिन्होंने गहराई से इन चीज़ों को देखा, उन्होंने इस चीज़ को दिखाया, और उसके आधार पे नई शिक्षा नीति में होने वाले परिवर्तनों का हम रैशनल तरीके से, तार्किक तरीके से विरोध करके तर्कपूर्ण तथ्यों के आधार पे मध्ययुगीन इतिहास को सामने रखना बहुत ज़रूरी है। और मुझे खुशी केवल एक बात की है कि इस बात पर हमारे इतिहासकारों ने बहुत कुछ योगदान दिया है, वो हमारे पास मौजूद है। उन चीज़ों को आगे ले जाना, उन चीज़ों को मजबूती से उनके बारे में कैंपेन करना कि वास्तविक इतिहास ये है जो लोगों तक पहुंचाया जाना चाहिए। और उस इतिहास में जो हमारी मेल जोल की परंपराएं हैं, वो भक्ति परंपरा हो, सूफी परंपरा हो, हमारे संगीत की परंपराएं हों, ये सब सकारात्मक चीज़ें हमारे सिलेबस में लाने की ज़रूरत है। और जो नकारात्मक चीज़ों को लाया जा रहा है उसका विरोध करने की पूरी ज़रूरत है। तो मैं आपका बहुत धन्यवाद करता हूँ और उम्मीद करता हूँ कि पूरी एकेडमिक कम्युनिटी और ख़ास तौर से हिस्टोरियंस इस बात के लिए एक लगातार कैंपेन चलाएंगे ताकि हम इस नए सिलेबस का विरोध करके एक उस सिलेबस के बारे में बात करें जो तर्कपूर्ण तरीके से तथ्यों के आधार पे इतिहास की बात करें। बहुत धन्यवाद।
Thank you so much, Professor Rampuneni sir. Am I audible to all of you?
Yes.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for the speech that you delivered just now, thoroughly exposing the conspiracy that is afoot to communalize the history of India, particularly medieval history of India. At the same time, you have also spoken out the way to fight it out, that this continuous campaign against such nefarious design of the powers that be has to be continued, and that is to be taken up by us people. Thank you so much, sir. Now, I would like to request Professor A. Karunanandan, an eminent historian too, and the retired head of the Department of History, Vivekananda College, Chennai, to deliver his valuable speech, who would be dealing mainly with tampering with ancient Indian history. Professor Karunanandan, please.
Good evening to all learned friends. Much of the core of the subject had already been dealt by our esteemed senior professor, Irfan Habib. I am expected to focus on the tampering with the ancient history. ancient Indian history. Friends, first of all, we want to make it one thing clear. That is, we are resisting distortion and we are nothing against the revision of history books. History is not a scripture. History is not to be treated as an unalterable scripture. History has to undergo transformation with the discovery of new facts and with the emergence of various interpretations. It has to become more and more inclusive. But we are more concerned with, under the pretext of rewriting history, there is an official move to distort the established history of India. History has to be evolved through academic exercises and not from the diktats from the officialdom or from the ministry. And new discoveries and interpretations will be accommodated in due course. Here we don't find all the historians of the past as enemies of India or as conspirators. There may be inadequacies in their writings. There may be omissions commissioned in their writings that can be perfected through academic deliberations. But today, what is being done is that something is imposed on us as history, which is irrational and very often it is inhuman too. The present attempts of the government, the BJP government, is that it abuses the University Grant Commission to impose a unitary syllabus on all the higher education institutions throughout India. Professor Habib have referred to the UGC syllabus for BA program. And this is not for any academic purpose. This is meant for a political hidden agenda. The history is used, or the distortions in history is being used to dismantle the very ideological foundations of modern India. Modern India is a democratic India, a federal India, a secular India, and a liberal India. These ideological foundations are being dismantled by this, what you call, tampering with ancient history. One such, for the sake of time constraint, we can mention only a few things here. First thing, for the first time, the students are told to have a full paper on the idea of Bharat. It is a fact that Constitution refers to India, that is Bharat, as a union of states. India is a primary concern. Bharat is an alternate name. So far in the history textbooks, the idea of India was discussed. It was explained. That idea was meant for an inclusive India. It recognized India as a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-linguistic entity. And that idea of India was not based on what you call any, communal or sectarian considerations. How the idea of India was evolved through experiences, how we realize the modern Indian state, the sense of India, everything is explained in the idea of India. But in this paper, a compulsory paper for the BA history students, the first paper is the idea of Bharat. Deliberately, they have omitted India in it. It is never explained as idea of India. Yeah, they simply mention that idea of Bharat. Not only that, the content of that particular paper and the 5 divisions of that particular paper and the references books mentioned in that particular paper are all Sanskrit scripture oriented, mythology oriented, and it is not an inclusive nation that is presented there. Only the Vedic tradition is being emphasized, focused in this particular paper. If you accept that without any protest, if you don't challenge it, what would become to India? India is a land of unity, land for unity in diversity. The diversity is being now rejected. India becomes a unitary state with a unitary culture, and everything derives their existence from a single source. It is not only irrational, unscientific, it is also meant to curtail the equality, dignity of other constituents of the Indian state. There are too many ethnic groups, too many linguistic groups, religious groups, cultural groups in India, and no one can be treated as a subordinate to one mainstream. Here, everybody is subordinate to one mainstream Vedic stream, according to that explanation, the idea of Bharat. Everything emanates from Vedas. Nothing can be pre-Vedic. Nothing can be non-Vedic. Everything was confined to the Vedic expansion and extension. But the Indian state today is based on the very concept that it is a heterogeneous state. Different groups, different ethnic groups, different languages, different cultural groups, different religious groups can live together in this land. And the unity would be based on equality. Nobody is to be demonized in this. Nobody is to be made the superior in comparison with others. So here, how you are going to arrange the differences within the particular framework? India has seen invasions. There were immigrants, invaders, and all of them have become settled in India. And the later day immigrants cannot call the yesteryear's immigrants as traitors, as foreigners, as aliens. So this Indian civilization, if you want to make it very clear, a federal civilization, was the outcome of interaction between various groups, various cultural groups, various social groups. There are, even today, there are distinct cultures. There is also an evolved synthetic culture. The Hindutva history does not accept that synthetic process in Indian life. It rejects it. According to them, there can be nothing non-Vedic, there can be nothing pre-Vedic. That is why they now try to tamper with the earliest civilization of India, Indus Valley civilization, by changing the nomenclature from Indus Valley civilization, Harappan civilization, into Sindhu Saraswati civilization. They think they can make it Vedic civilization. Not only that, they now predate the Vedas, predating Veda. Indian culture commences in 10,000 BC. Since nothing can be pre-Vedic, we will have to construe that the Vedic culture commenced in 10,000 BC itself. as Professor Habib had very clearly pointed out, that goes against the scientific facts that would help the scripting of history. Here, predating the Vedas and stating that even the Harappan civilization was a part of the Vedic culture is nothing but distorting history and denying the plural contributions that India received from the various groups. And then we find that why they introduce a monoculture history in India now. Monoculture history and everything, as the Sudarshan Rao, who was the chairman of the Indian Historical Council of Research, Indian Council of Historical Research, once commented that everything must be related to Vedas, nothing could be pre-Vedic. This is a dictated concept which is being made to be accepted as history by the students, innocent students. History has to be improved through inquisitive questions. There must be deliberations whether the given fact is acceptable or not, whether the interpretation is acceptable or not. Through deliberations only we can perfect history, not by the official verdict. You cannot conclude, you cannot make a proclamation that would be deemed as history. Yeah, this is one serious effect, that dispensing with the terminology India and using only that Bharatiya or Bharat as the identity of an emerging nation, new nation, and then describing that Bharat through Sanskrit scripture alone would be a mischievous one that would make non-Sanskritic groups in India as somebody who are secondary citizens or who are unreliable citizens or inimical to the main culture. The ancient India is described in such a way that only the Vedic culture is the mainstream, others are secondary or what you call lesser streams, as once K.N. Nilakanta Shastri explained. So this is a dangerous trend. Then when they push back the date of the early civilization to 10,000 BC, naturally they'll have to indulge in euphemistic practices. They must make myths as histories. That is why Ramayana and Mahabharata are being attempted to be historical facts. Using Mahabharata and Ramayana to derive some historical conclusion is something different. Accepting Mahabharata, Ramayana and all the Puranas as real history is something different. This euphemism is adopted by this present regime. And also they make a very mischievous move. The word Hindu is being gradually replaced by Sanatana. As an example, I would show you an ad given for the Nalanda University. In the ad, besides the Buddhist studies and philosophy, they mention Hindu studies, within bracket Sanatana. The Indian historians, especially of the remote past, used to consider the word Hindu a convenient terminology to incorporate Vedic and non-Vedic streams. The Vedic Aryans were not idol worshippers. Their rituals were based on only the yajnas. They became the idol worshippers later stage, from whom they got this system. When and where and why they adopted a temple system, this should be explained, because that was the result of a synthesis. The pre-Vedic people had the temple system or a idol worship system. So they adopted the deities of other groups in India and approved them. That is why Shankara himself, had given a list of 6 religious groups who are amenable to the Shankara's Vedic order, Sanatana order, Shanmada. All these Shanmadas were non-Vedic systems. They were adopted for the priestly purposes of the influential segment in the society. So in Hinduism, by Hindu we mean a group which includes both Vedic, non-Vedic, a culture which includes Vedic culture and non-Vedic cultures. In fact, you will include even the Shramanic ideas, Shramanic developments, and the Dravidian ideas and Dravidian architecture. India's civilization derived its sources from different quarters. Vedas are not the only source. There were very many other sources from which the present day system was evolved. Social belief, social arrangement, everything. Not everywhere the same Chaturvarna system is followed. There were other systems too. Not everywhere the primogeniture was practiced. There were matrilineal succession too in India. Why these differences from region to region? If it was from one single stream as a source, there was no need for the diversified social and cultural developments. Because India was a land of diversity, because it was a multi-ethnic country, multicultural country, multilinguistic country, the differences had become indispensable and became part of the Indian culture. This particular aspect is totally absent in the ancient Indian history as prescribed by the University Grand Commission. And this University Grand Commission itself, I will tell that it plays the role of an usurper. The syllabus making must be left to the academic bodies. The universities has been doing it through the Board of Studies and academic councils. The UGC is only an administrative body under the control of the central government. How the administrative body could usurp the academic responsibility of framing a syllabus for history? This shows that their interest in speedily distorting Indian history to effect a psych change in the minds of the upcoming generation. So for them, India is one nation, one culture, and one entity. But our makers of Indian Constitution were very clear that India was a nation of nations. India was a federation, union of states with different cultures. And this basic foundation of Indian state is being dismantled by the, in a way, so-called diktats emanating from the BJP government in India. The new education policy stresses much on the ancient glorified past, glorious past. Ancient historians are not, history is not meant for seeking pride and developing prejudices. History is meant for seeking the truth and try to cementing a nation. But here they use the history, ancient history, to demonize some people who are already within the society, to demonize a system which were not amenable to the influential segment. The Shramanic thoughts are totally absent in the ancient Indian history. Buddhism is demonized, as Irfan Habib has referred to. Ashoka's Buddhist pacifism was responsible for the decline of the Mauryan Empire. The Mauryan Empire lasted for nearly 180 years. The Guptan Empire did not last more than 150 years. They did not explain what were the causes of the decline and fall of the Guptan Empire. For them, Guptan age was a golden age. Why this differential treatment? From the days of Nandas to the fall of Harsha, the dominant faith system was Buddhist system. Most of the architecture, sculpture, everything belonged to Buddhism and Jainism. Brahmanic thoughts, Brahmanic ideas, Brahmanic cultures were very much popular in the Indian subcontinent. But ancient Indian history tried to marginalize the non-Vedic streams from the Indian history. Ancient Indian history means that the ancient India and history. History must be rational, scientific. Ancient means a chronology. What is ancient to the North India was not ancient to South India. Medievalism commences, according to them, from the advent of Islamic rule. In northwestern part of India, it commences in the 8th century. In the Gangetic Valley, in the 10th century. But in the extreme south, it was the 14th century. So there was no chronology, the chronological cohesion in it. And territorially, ancient India totally is silent on South India, as if South does not exist. Our recent excavations revealed, archaeological inquiries revealed that there was an urban culture in the extreme south, Tamil Nadu, the Madurai region, by about 7th century BC. The 7th century BC coincides with the second urbanization in the Gangetic Valley, Solasa Mahajana Sabha. Solasa Mahajana Sabha is given a passing reference, but the southern urban centers are totally omitted in the ancient history. The Sadavahanas were there, only a passing reference is made to Sadavahanas. Why this neglect of South in ancient Indian history? Then you call it ancient North Indian history. Make ancient Indian history a truly ancient Indian history. Don't make it a territorial history and then or a sectarian history. Today they try to project the ancient history, try to make the ancient history as a sectarian history. The modern India should have its foundations in a secular history, which recognizes the heterogeneity of its past. If that heterogeneity is not adequately explained in ancient history, then wrong thoughts may emanate from the young generations. This has to be aware. History will have an impact on younger minds. And what we are interested is that the younger mind should derive from history a better idea about a nation, better idea about a past, not a concocted story. They want to treat all the myths as histories. And if we don't do it, we are being called traitors, as if we follow the footsteps of the Westerners. But for the James Princip, this Brahmi script would not have been deciphered. But for Cunningham, the Buddhist humanism would not have seen the light. But for Marshall, the Dravidian civilization of Harappa could not have been a history, could not have become history. So we don't consider all the foreign historians, archaeologists as traitors. You may have different opinion in their conclusions. Then debate on it. And scientific rational reasons must guide your deliberations and not your faith in a particular scripture, particular Puranas or particular myth. That should not be the guiding force of history making. History has to be made with territorial constraints, chronological constraints, with also, as Professor Habib mentioned, should be an inclusive one. The different segments in the given territory should be given adequate space in the history scripting. This BJP government does not want it. They try to, even the word Hindu has become uncomfortable to them, because by Hindu we could bring in the Dravidian architecture and what you call the Bhakti movement of the South. Now they want to replace it with Sanadana. Sanadana is exclusively oriented on Smritis. It has nothing to do with the other the Sramana thoughts or the Dravidian thoughts, and it that insists on one particular social arrangement which has been despised by many generations and a vast majority of the people. So this sectarian interest should not be allowed to become history of India. We want a real India. We want a plural India. We want a liberal India, secular India, and that concept should be strengthened by a real ancient Indian history. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Karunanandan, for your very successful delivery of your speech that thoroughly exposes the evil design of the present BJP-led government, that having hijacked the autonomous agencies like UGC is out to present this land in our textbooks, in the syllabi, as a land that is known for its multiculturality and inclusiveness, as a land of a single culture and exclusiveness. And in fact, it immensely has benefited us, and we have got many facts from a speech that will go a long way to help us hide this evil design out. Now, the speaker who will be addressing this webinar is Professor Anita Rampal, the former Dean, Faculty of Education, Delhi University, who also was the former chairperson for writing NCERT textbooks for children of primary schools. She will be dealing with the critical pedagogy and developing textbooks. Madam Professor Rampal, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And coming after our historians and how they have brought out what is happening in terms of the distortions today, I would also like to focus on the challenges before us in terms of what we understand by critical pedagogy, which has been really brought in, at least at the NCERT level, since 2005, 2006, and also what we mean by developing textbooks, the role of textbooks, and not just writing textbooks, but what are the challenges of developing textbooks. So I'll start with trying to say that, today we know what is happening because we saw what came into the National Education Policy document, and many of us have strongly analyzed and critiqued it, and even said how, right through the rhetoric, we can see how it's actually going against children's basic fundamental rights. In fact, it's even contradicting the right to education, which has come in 2010, and it is bringing in all kinds of players and actually going against the role of what a school should be and what kind of education should be there, which is given in the right to education. It's quite historic. People across the world, when they look at our RTE, they say that there are very few countries which have a right which actually talk about the nature of education, which should have diverse opinions. I mean, this is true for children aged 6 to 14. Diverse opinions, explorations, discoveries, giving the full chance for a child to develop her potential, to be understanding and expressing herself. So I'm starting with that because we sometimes forget that we have a fundamental right, which has been given by the Constitution, and anything else cannot just override this right. So whether it's at the school level or at the college level. And what do we mean by, so even what came in to the RTE and what came in as the National Curriculum Framework became the base document for the right to education. So these two are linked as far as we are concerned. And that's what the kind of effort that went into looking at syllabi, looking at textbooks. What do we understand by a democratic understanding of education? What is inclusive? I mean, all these things came into the way we were looking at textbooks also. So when we talk about critical literacy, when we might even talk about what are those practices which actually help you look at ways of seeing, you look at what kinds of seeing and non-seeing are you finding in a document, in a visual, in a graphic, in an inscription? So understanding power relations, understanding what kinds of representations are coming in is what one would say normally happens in critical literacy. But critical pedagogy is something which we derive from the understanding of the educational thinker and theorist Paulo Freire, and in which he is talking about not just reading the word, but he's talking about reading the world. And which also means, and I have written about how it's also writing the world, writing by RIGHTING, in which it's actual action. What is transformative about the way that we understand the world, that we can actually change the world. And that is important for us, because as we look back at the Constitution and we look back at those who were developing the Constitution, Ambedkar, Gandhi, they were very clear that, we might bring in equality, but how will fraternity come? And that's why education, and especially the school, was a site of this kind of a democratic process where people come together, they work together, they live together, and they try and look at the world together. And that's how they understand differences. They understand the way diversities and difference are constructed in our normal lives. Because in our normal lives, how do we develop what we might think even as in terms of our common sense notion, or we might think in terms of the socialization or the enculturation that happens as we grow, जो हम जिस तरह से अपने बचपन में अपने आसपास दुनिया को देख रहे हैं, या जिस तरह से एक सांस्कृतिक रूप से हम सोचना समझ रहे हैं, जिसको हम शायद सोचते हैं कि ये हमारी सामान्य जानकारी है, हम चाहे एक इस तरह की अवधारणा कि खाना क्या होता है, भोजन क्या होता है, what is food. So even a notion like that, which we don't question normally, is something which needs to be critically looked at. And that is what is the role of a textbook. That is what is the role of a school and a classroom, because there we try and even get out of these ideas which have developed as we are growing up, because we grow up often in segregated or often in smaller socialized groups and don't really go deep into understanding what are the other diverse people around us, or the diverse ecologies of thought around us. And that is the role of critical pedagogy. So critical pedagogy is not just, people think it's just asking critical questions. No, it is a pedagogy for social justice. It is a pedagogy which is trying to unravel the power equations between what you see and what you do not see, and whose knowledge is coming into your textbook. Because we know that there are dominant knowledges. We know that in educational discourses, people like Michael Apple have written about official knowledge, which doesn't mean that it is the knowledge of the officialdom or the politicians, but it is the knowledge of the dominant groups. So, and that is the conflict. That is a kind of tussle between trying to get something, your control over a textbook. So to be able to get around our own prejudices and our own biases, which we may not see, is something which we think is the role of a school, the role of a classroom, the role of a democratic kind of engagement with our ideas and with others' ideas. So, for instance, I was talking about food. Now, even an anthropologist like Marvin Harris, when he would go to his master's students in the US in a university, he would take with him a can of Japanese fried grasshoppers. And he would ask them, that they're becoming anthropologists. So what is it that they think of when they see this? And they would all make, sounds of ugh, and they'd groan and all. सब तरह की आवाजें लोग निकालते थे जब उनको इस तरह के कोई कीड़े उनके टीचर दिखा रहे हैं यूनिवर्सिटी में और पूछ रहे हैं कि इसको आप क्या कहते हो. और उसी संदर्भ में हैरिस, जो कि एक एंथ्रोपोलॉजिस्ट थे, उन्होंने कहा कि हम अक्सर जिस तरह से एक नेचुरल सोच लेते हैं कि हम भोजन को सिर्फ अपनी नजरों से देख रहे हैं और किसी भी और चीज को हम सोचते हैं कि ये तो, in fact, university students were saying it is not natural to be eating this. तो वो इस तरह से सवाल उठाते थे कि अगर हमें दुनिया को समझना है और लोगों की जिंदगी और संस्कृतियों को समझना है, तो हमें अपने अवधारणाओं से बाहर निकलना होगा. And in the environmental studies textbook syllabus, at class 3 we have given what is not food. We have given many examples and we want children to think कि क्या भोजन नहीं हो, क्योंकि हम ये उनको समझ दिला रहे हैं, यहाँ तक उनके समझ को खोल रहे हैं उदाहरणों के साथ कि कुछ भी, मतलब दुनिया में अलग जगह और हमारे देश में अलग जगह पे अलग तरह की चीजों को भोजन और बहुत स्वादिष्ट भोजन माना जाता है. और ये एक सांस्कृतिक, एक कल्चरल कॉन्स्ट्रक्ट है. ये सिर्फ कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स, प्रोटीन्स और ऐसे करके शब्दों में नहीं परिभाषित किया जा सकता. हमें समझना है इसको एक सांस्कृतिक तरह से और उसको क्रिटिकल पेडागॉजी से. क्यों ऐसा है कि सिर्फ टेक्स्ट बुक में कुछ तरह के भोजन आते हैं और बाकी नहीं आते? Because when we tried to bring in a true story of an Irula child from a Tamil context, from Zai Whitaker's book, who has worked with the Irula tribe and worked with people who deal with snake and snake venom. तो वो बच्चा जो है, काली उसका नाम है, वो बच्चा जो एक सत्य कहानी, सत्य घटना है, वो अपने स्कूल में, क्योंकि एक ट्राइबल बच्चा है, बाकी सबकी नजरों से उसको सब अलग तरह से. सो ये जो अदरिंग है, किसी को दूसरा समझना, किसी को अपने से हटकर समझना और अक्सर उसको अपने से नीचे भी एक दर्जा देना. So when a snake comes in one day into the class and everyone runs helter-skelter, this child quite naturally picks up the snake and throws it out. क्योंकि उसका जो ज्ञान था, his knowledge has come from his people's knowledge, and he understands, his own community understands how to deal with snakes. तो उसी दिन से उस बच्चे को, जो वो अपना खाना अगर वो अपना टिफिन खोले और उसका टिफिन का सबसे स्वादिष्ट हिस्सा था दीमक, तली हुई दीमक, और वो अपना टिफिन भी बच्चों के साथ नहीं खा सकता था. और ये ज़ाई व्हिटेकर अपने ही बेटे के दोस्त के बारे में लिख रहे हैं. उनका बेटा जिनका दोस्त था काली, कि वो अपना टिफिन भी अपने स्कूल में नहीं खोल सकता क्योंकि उसको ऐसी उसको इस तरह से प्रताड़ित किया जा रहा है और उसको अलग करके कोई उससे दोस्ती नहीं कर रहा. पर जिस दिन लोगों ने देखा कि उसके ज्ञान का हिस्सा है कि वो एक सांप को भी किस तरह से स्कूल के क्लासरूम से बाहर कर सकता है, और फिर लोगों ने उसको समझना शुरू किया. कहने का मतलब है, हम इसको ला रहे थे अपने टेक्स्ट बुक में, पर तमिलनाडु के कुछ जब अधिकारी आए और उन्होंने देखा कि ये हमने किस तरह से कोशिश की है टू राइट आवर चैप्टर ऑन फूड, देयर वाज अ स्ट्रॉन्ग फीलिंग दैट इससे तो बहुत असहमति हो जाएगी, पार्लियामेंट में सवाल उठ जाएगा, अभी ये पहला साल है, हम ये पहली बार टेक्स्ट बुक्स लिख रहे हैं, तो इसको आप न लाइए. सो आई एम जस्ट सेइंग दैट वी हैड grappled with this idea right from class 3. At that stage, it was the first year, and we realized that if officials from Tamil Nadu are themselves feeling uncomfortable, so we said, हम इरुला ट्राइब की बात नहीं करेंगे क्योंकि उसको पहले वैसे ही प्रताड़ित किया जाता है. these notions of एक ट्राइब क्या है, आदिवासी क्या है, उसको किस तरह से, किस दर्जे से देखा जा रहा है, किन चश्मों से देखा जा रहा है. हमने हांगकांग का एक एग्जाम्पल लिया और वहां के कुछ लोगों से पूछा, और हांगकांग में एक बच्ची की कहानी जो अपनी माँ के साथ जब वो सांप खाना चाहती है, वो कैसे जाती है और होटल में क्या खाती है. क्योंकि हांगकांग एक अपमार्केट दुनिया मानी जा रही है, सब लोग, everyone is aspiring to reach Hong Kong, and so that's why that will probably not raise objections or so-called hurt sentiments. But I'm just trying to say that even writing textbooks about different people, I mean, I'm not even talking about the past, I'm talking about the present. But of course, it is important to understand the past, not just as some facts which are normally thrown in, some information that is normally thrown in, but in terms of interrogating our present and shaping our future. और यहाँ पर I want to raise the a very interesting example of one of our iconic textbook writers जिन्होंने स्कूल में आके किताबें लिखी थी क्योंकि उन्होंने समीक्षा की थी एनसीईआरटी की किताबों का और फिर एनसीईआरटी की किताबों की समीक्षा की थी और फिर उनको जब सरकार ने कहा था प्रोफेसर रोमिला थापड़ कि अब आप आके किताबें लिखो, तो अब जब ये सब प्रक्रिया चल रही थी क्रिटिकल पेडागोजी की, तो उन्होंने बहुत ही सुंदर तरह से कहा कि मैं अच्छी हिस्ट्री की किताबें लिखती थी पर हिस्ट्री की टेक्स्ट बुक्स नहीं लिखती थी. आई थिंक वी हैव टू डिफरेंशिएट बिटवीन अ हिस्ट्री बुक and a history textbook, and that is what I'm trying to do. That how do you allow a child, and that is where social constructivism also comes in, that how do you allow a child through a certain narrative to be able to relate to herself. कई लोग एक सामाजिक प्रक्रिया में ज्ञान गढ़ते हैं, अपने ज्ञान को रचते हैं, वो एक इंडिविजुअल प्रोसेस नहीं है. नो लर्नर इज लर्निंग इंडिविजुअली, दैट इज नॉट द लर्निंग प्रोसेस. सो एक सामाजिक रूप से जब एक व्यक्ति कुछ पढ़ रहा है, कुछ देख रही है, अपनी समझ बना रही है, कुछ ऐसी घटना पढ़ रही है जो उससे अलग है, तो वो कैसे आप अपनी टेक्स्ट बुक के दौरान उसको सवाल करोगे, उसको सोचने को मजबूर करोगे. हाउ विल यू टीज द माइंड? That is important. How do you interact with the mind of the child? You're not just transmitting information, but to be able to allow the learner to construct knowledge, you have to do it in a certain way so that it is allowing the child to go beyond her own common sense notions, to even challenge and critique and interrogate her common sense ideas, and then go beyond that to say, acha, aise bhi hai. And that is important, especially for young children, because young children we find are very, very empathetic. Children have a very strong sense of feeling for others if they're given the opportunity. And that's why they say that when children read about diverse communities, diverse cultures, diverse fictions from different cultures, children really, I mean, people are studying that now, that how children develop empathy because they relate to themselves. And children have a strong sense of fair and unfair. बहुत ही बल्कि almost like black and white, you know, बच्चों का बहुत एक न्याय के प्रति बहुत एक उनकी अपनी संवेदना होती है. So why is it important that when people in different countries try to think of the past or try to think of injustice, because critical pedagogy is about bringing up social justice, is about talking about inequalities and talking about action for justice. तो बहुत टेक्स्ट बुक का भी ये एक रोल है कि हम वो कलेक्टिव मेमोरी क्या है, वो सिर्फ कुछ लोगों की नहीं है, जैसे अभी कहा गया सिर्फ कुछ डोमिनेंट लोग, कोई एक धर्म, और जैसे कंस्ट्रक्ट किया, क्योंकि जिसने लिखा है उनकी अपनी भी संवेदनाएं उसमें आती हैं. सो द राइटिंग, वी आर टेकिंग अवे द वर्ड राइटिंग. And like Romila Thapar said, that I can write good books, but writing textbooks or developing textbooks is a collective endeavor. And ये अभी पिछले जो दौरान जो नेशनल करिकुलम फ्रेमवर्क बना था, कोई एक इंडिविजुअल ऑथर नहीं था. आप देखेंगे, it was a textbook development team always, and that was the effort, that we bring in a lot of perspectives even, and a lot of expertise, even when we are writing textbooks, because that was important. It was important to work on that aspect. Also, we find that even amongst the traditional people who are involved with textbooks, especially in SCRTs, in NCRTs, I mean, half our energy was going in trying to shake their own understandings very often, because very often this was done in an unthinking way, that a topic has to come in. So the syllabus and the textbook is just a topic. Is topic ko dal do, is topic ko nikal do. That is not how children learn. Children's conceptual development, in fact, if we recognize, and we have been saying for so long, that time is a very difficult, very abstract concept for a child, especially time which is thousands of years away. And somehow, unfortunately, हमारी जब टेक्स्ट बुक्स हिस्ट्री की बनती हैं तो उसका एक क्रोनोलॉजी होता है कि एंशिएंट हिस्ट्री से शुरू करते हैं, जो सबसे मुश्किल है. that is the सबसे अमूर्त है, सबसे abstract है बच्चे के लिए समझना. For a child even to understand 100 years back, what does that mean? We have to start thinking of my grandfather and my great grandfather, and we have discussions about आपके पूर्वज, आपके इमीडिएट पूर्वज, तो आपके दादा दादी, नाना नानी, वो क्या खाते थे, किस तरह की फसलें थी, क्या पहनते थे, उनकी जिंदगी क्या थी, आज क्या फर्क आप देख रहे हो कि नहीं देख रहे, because that is how you understand time and change and continuities and discontinuities, and that is what a social understanding is about. So it is important to look at the history syllabus differently, not in terms of this ancient, medieval, the way it's done, at least with early learners in school. And that is what was tried in some way also to get beyond these ideas. Like, for instance, the history textbook looked at the history of clothing. Now, that is interesting because you can look not just as people and forts and names and dynasties. In fact, even in our current textbooks, there are too many mentions of too many dynasties and too many names, especially in the 12 to 14 age group. We are ready to rethink how that needs to be done, but not through distortions. What is happening now is completely cherry picking certain things, throwing them out, changing the narrative, erasing history. It is not revising the syllabus, it is erasure of history, and that is not acceptable. So how do we bring in a certain way in which the textbook authority is not what comes in only from, because even teachers have their own perceptions. Teachers have their own perceptions, not just about the discipline, but about the learner. They think certain learners can do some things better because they come from a certain background. They think even about the process of learning, they think it's just give them information, tell them to repeat it, and that's what learning is. That's not what learning is. So teachers need a lot of orientation, and it's important that they interact, they understand the textbook. Otherwise, very often the teacher's official knowledge can undo a lot of what the textbook or the syllabus has tried. So I just wanted to say that in other countries, we find that the most difficult areas, the most troubling, the most sort of conflicting, contested areas of the past are something which people are bringing up now as memorials, in the sense like a museum. So in Africa, the Museum of Apartheid, it takes you through the museum and makes you feel. So you go in either like a black or a white. आपको दो तरह का लॉटरी होता है, आप या तो एक ब्लैक या एक श्वेत के रूप में अंदर जाते हो, और आपका पूरा इंटरेक्शन उसके साथ, उस म्यूजियम के साथ आपको ये फील करवाता है कि अगर आप उस जमाने में ब्लैक थे तो कैसे आपको देखा जा रहा था, या वाइट थे तो कैसे देखा जा रहा था. सो इट इज हॉलोकॉस्ट म्यूजियम. इतनी सुंदर तरह से छोटी छोटी चीजें बच्चे जब लेके गए कंसंट्रेशन कैंप्स में, बच्चों की छोटे टेक्स्ट बुक, उनका रबर, उनका शार्पनर, उनकी पेंसिल, उनकी डायरी क्या थी वहां रखी हुई है, ताकि आप जब देखो, हम भी जब देखते हैं तो we relate with those things. This is called relating to objects, and this is the kind of way that we need to look at our memory of the past, not just through names and dates and passing exams, but in terms of sensibilities, in terms of relating, in terms of empathizing, because that is crucial for our present. हमारे देश में आज जिस तरह की divisiveness सोशल मीडिया के आधार पे, एक पूरी बबल चेम्बर के आधार पे लोग हो रहे. अभी बच्चे कई दिल्ली के स्कूलों में टीचर्स कह रहे हैं कि children are asking because their parents are looking at social media of completely fake things. गांधी के बारे में इतना झूठ उनके माँ बाप के पास आ रहा है कि बच्चे 12 साल के 11 साल के बच्चे स्कूल आके पूछ रहे हैं कि गांधी ने ऐसा क्यों किया था, गांधी ने ऐसा क्यों किया था. So I think we have to recognize that there's certain things which are taking over in terms of the bubble chambers in which people are living, and people are not bothering about what is fake or what is not fake. This is a post-truth environment, और जितना गलत कुछ आता है वो हमारे साइकोलॉजिस्ट ने कहा है कि उतना ज्यादा नशा होता है. It gives you a high. So people don't want to look at what is truth. And that is the milieu within which parents also are living and children will be living. So we have to be developing textbooks, recognizing कि ये जो visual materials हैं, जो literary एक multimodal way से किस तरह से हम इन चीज़ों को सामने लाएंगे. और जैसे मैंने कहा कि जैसे वो म्यूजियम्स में कोशिश है कि भूलो मत, म्यूजियम ऑफ पार्टीशन अमृतसर में, म्यूजियम ऑफ होलोकॉस्ट, म्यूजियम ऑफ अमेरिकन इंडियंस या नेटिव इंडियंस इन अमेरिका, आई वाज सरप्राइज्ड व्हेन आई सॉ कि उस म्यूजियम में पहली बार एक ऑफिशियल डिस्कोर्स है दैट हाउ द नेटिव अमेरिकन्स वर डेसिमेटेड, किस तरह से उनको खत्म किया गया था, बायोलॉजिकली भी एक बीमारी फैला के उनको खत्म किया गया था, किस तरह से उन पे रूल करने के लिए और उन पे कंट्रोल करने के लिए. और अब वो म्यूजियम्स में भी आ रहा है. और एक अमेरिकन प्रोफेसर जब इंडिया आए थे तो वो हैरान हो गए हमारी हिस्ट्री टेक्स्ट बुक्स देख के कि एनसीईआरटी की हिस्ट्री टेक्स्ट बुक में जिस तरह से अमेरिकन इंडियंस की हिस्ट्री दी हुई है, वो कहते हैं हमारी टेक्स्ट बुक्स में भी ऐसा कम मिलता है हमको. सो दीज आर questions being raised all over the world. This is an attempt that is happening, that dominant discourses also, yes, हम देख रहे हैं कि जो अब जैसे कर्नाटका में हो रहा है, we are finding that all these, because it's not just Karnataka, ये तो nationally हो रहा है. There is a national guidelines for all the states. उनको questions दिए हैं, उनको e-templates दिए हैं हर position paper के लिए, वो center से आ रहा है. सो फेडरलिज्म भी इस तरह से अपनाया नहीं जा रहा जैसे होना चाहिए. और वो आपको कहा कह रहे हैं कि हर सब्जेक्ट के पढ़ाने में नॉलेज ऑफ इंडिया क्या होगा. एंड नॉलेज ऑफ इंडिया इज ओनली दिस ग्लोरिफाइड अनक्वेश्चन्ड पास्ट. चाहे आप मैथमेटिक्स पढ़ा रहे हो, साइंस पढ़ा रहे हो, ज्योग्राफी पढ़ा रहे हो, ये यूलोजाइज्ड क्वेश्चन जिसमें सिर्फ कुछ लोगों को आप रिप्रेजेंट कर रहे हो और मेजॉरिटी की जिंदगी कहीं नहीं दिख रही है, बल्कि वो अगर प्रताड़ित हुए या उन पर जुल्म हुए, कास्ट को लेके, रिलीजन को लेके कोई सवाल नहीं पूछा, या महिला को लेके जेंडर्ड कैसे था कोई सवाल नहीं पूछा जाना चाहिए. तो ये जो नॉलेज ऑफ इंडिया अब सेंट्रली हर सब्जेक्ट में आ रहा है, इसके प्रति भी हमको बहुत सचेत रहना है. एंड वी हैव टू रेजिस्ट and we have to reveal and expose these things, because I had exposed something about the Karnataka position paper and the Knowledge of India paper, which is talking all kinds of complete bizarre facts, bizarre things about food, about what should be given to a child and what should not, and in terms of even in terms of the midday meal, what is nutritious, but it's talking in terms of the history, it's talking about learning, it's talking about science. And I think that this is going to be a challenge for us, because on the one hand, I personally talk about the history of ideas. I teach notions of science and technology studies. When we look at histories, we look at a decolonial aspect of people's knowledge. And, even we talk about the example of vaccination, and we try and understand that Edward Jenner also got his information from women who looked after cows. तो वो एक पीपल्स नॉलेज था, एक वुमेन्स नॉलेज था, जिसके आधार पे एडवर्ड जेनर ने पहली बार वैक्सीनेशन बनाया था. मगर साउथ एशिया में, और वो इंडिया नहीं था, साउथ एशिया उस समय किस तरह से वेरियोलेशन हो रहा था और किस तरह से स्मॉल पॉक्स के पस को लेकर उसको 1 साल अटेनुएट करके, ताकि 1 साल में उसका असर कम हो जाए और फिर उसको दोबारा जाके लोगों में प्रिक किया जाता था और कहा जाता था कि आपको 3 दिन बुखार होगा पर उसके बाद आपको स्मॉल पॉक्स नहीं होगा. बट ये एक एम्पेरिकल नॉलेज था. ये क्यों हो रहा है, इसके पीछे क्या है, वो वायरस है या नहीं है, इसकी समझ नहीं थी. पर एक एम्पेरिकल नॉलेज को भी कैसे हम समझते हैं और फिर देखते हैं कि आगे साइंटिफिक नॉलेज में किस तरह से एम्पेरिकल पीपल्स नॉलेज ने क्या रोल, किस तरह से कंट्रीब्यूशन दिया है. So we have to bring in a scientific analysis of what is knowledge of India. We cannot bring it in this completely fabricated manner, the way it is coming in right now. And then also understand, as people are doing, what does indigenous knowledge mean. और हम इस तरह के डिस्कोर्स में आज इंडिजिनस या आदिवासी नहीं, हम वनवासी देखते हैं. तो ये भी एक पॉलिटिकल चॉइस है, क्यों आप आदिवासी नहीं कहना चाह रहे. जैसे अभी हमें प्रोफेसर्स ने बताया भी है. But we will need to work on this, and we will need to really resist these attempts at fabrication, falsification, and also then affecting children's. I mean, it's a deleterious, it's damaging for children learning. It's not just कि हमने हिस्ट्री गलत पढ़ा दी, पर हमने पूरी आज के समाज की समझ, उनकी अपनी समझ, देश की समझ, जिसके लिए हमारे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ने कहा था कि एजुकेशन सबके लिए जरूरी होना चाहिए, बिकॉज दैट इज वेयर पीपल विल कम टुगेदर. एक मिड डे मील is the only forum where children from different castes and religions actually come and eat together. Many children don't have this kind of a forum in their everyday life. So आज के इस विघटित तरह की जिंदगी को हम अगर रेजिस्ट करना चाहते हैं तो हमें इस पर और ज्यादा अपनी आवाज उठानी होगी. थैंक यू.
Thank you, Professor Rampal, for your highly illuminating speech. In fact, you educated us, at least me, I feel, in an area that not many of us have access to with regard to writing the correct way of writing textbooks. You defined critical literacy, you defined critical pedagogy, and you also spoke of democratization of curricula, and you gave a call to resist falsification, to fight against fabrication. Now, friends, you have come to the close of the program, this webinar. Before we close, just a few words from me as the moderator, and a few words also on behalf of All India Civic Education Committee that has organized this webinar. Friends, the speakers, all the four speakers, besides our president of All India Civic Education Committee, Sri Prakash Bhai Sahaji, all these speakers in their highly scholastic, academically wise and erudite speeches have done one thing, I would like to say. They have exposed the design, the conspiracy that is afoot to present this land of multiculturality, of inclusiveness, of togetherness as a land of a single culture. And for that, they have targeted history, distorting history in the name of rewriting it. I don't understand, I fail to understand how history can be rewritten. History speaks of facts, facts of the past, something that has been done, how can they undo it? In fact, that is possible only through falsification and fabrication. So the image, sorry, the message that emerges from this webinar is that the right thinking, the well-meaning, the education-loving people of the land who have realized it. I refer to the thousands of viewers and listeners of this program. We have to take this message to fight this conspiracy of the ruling class by taking it to the masses. We look forward to this type of help from the luminaries of the country, of whom just 4 are present with us today, and there are many still who are opposed to this idea of communalizing history, of falsifying history, and dividing people in the name of community, language, religion, and all that. So, I, on behalf of All India Civic Education Committee, earnestly appeal to those friends of ours, both who are in this webinar as listeners and viewers, and those are outside of this webinar, to take it seriously and to develop a strong campaign which All India Civic Education Committee has already done, and to strengthen it day by day, and to defeat this conspiracy of the government to falsify history and thereby to fulfill their desire to divide people and to perpetuate their rule. I, with these words, and with thanks to the thousands of listeners and viewers, and thanks to the erudite speakers, those who made this webinar a success, I conclude my speech with this. I declare the close of the webinar. Long live All India Civil Education Committee. Long live people's unity against all sorts of conspiracy to divide people and to falsify history. Thank you all.